Pop the corks on the champagne. The 2020 NFL season has officially begun. There is a multitude of news, especially, believe it or not, surrounding the Cincinnati Bengals when it comes to free agency, their roster, and all kinds of updates. We will get to that. We'll talk about and break down the deals and departures, and we'll talk about what's ahead for the team as free agency rolls on this Wednesday, the first official day of the 2020 NFL calendar. Whew. Hey, everybody. How's it going? I'm Anthony Cosenza. You might know who I am at this point. You probably know my co-host, John Sheeran. John, how you doing with this, I don't know what you want to call it, semi-quarantine, semi-lockdown? At least we've got some NFL news to keep us busy at this point with all this stuff going on, right?
There's a global pandemic happening, and of all teams to make waves in free agency, it's the Cincinnati Bengals. So, I mean, it must really be the end of the world, I guess. That's where we're at. So, we'll roll with the punches here.
And I got to say this, and, I know we usually do a mic drop thing at the end of the show to kind of close it out. I do want to say this, okay? I know the last few days, maybe even a week or so plus for some of you, depending on where you reside, has been tough. Both in, health, sports, scariness, all kinds of stuff. John, not only tonight, but the past 2 days in a row, I took the air just to kind of do a little bit of brief updates on free agency, which, by the way, we'll get to in just a second, just a little checklist and reminder for everybody where we're at. But I just want to say thank you because there are a lot of people that have been tuning into this show as we record live. There's a lot of interest in not only our show, but just the Cincinnati Bengals in general and what they've been doing, which is really refreshing. And I know it's a weird time for people. Maybe you are bored, and maybe that's why you're paying attention a bit more to us. But I just got to say, I think it's very cool that you guys, I'm seeing a lot of, hey, hooday, good day, hey there, guys. Mike Donahue, I know him well from, at least virtually, I know Mike well. So, hey, Mike. Others that are familiar faces, I just want to say thank you for tuning into this show and the other shows across the Cincy Jungle platform because we're giving you some stuff, some material, and it's given us things to do. We know you could be doing other stuff, but you're tuning into this program, and I just want to say a quick thank you, John. I don't know if you want to say anything else as well, but I just know it's a weird time, and I can't thank our listeners enough for listening to our show, tuning in, and all of that.
Sports are an escape. It's escapist reality TV, and when they're not on, you gotta get creative, I guess. So I'm glad that the team and that we cover for this podcast on a weekly basis is giving us some new things to talk about in a time where it's truly unprecedented. So everybody who's watching and tuning in or listening to after the fact, keep hanging in there. We're all thinking about you wherever you are in this country or around the globe. We'll get through this.
Yep, we will. And if boredom is the worst thing we've got to deal with, there are bigger tragedies in life. But thank you to all of you for tuning in live, for checking out the show, listening to the show. As always, you can get the show on a number of audio platforms. I say it every time and multiple times a show, but I'll remind you again, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, Megaphone, and iHeartRadio are among the many platforms that you can get this program. You can also get the videos on our YouTube channel, subscribe to those platforms however you want to watch or listen to the program. All of our stuff is on cincyjungle.com, which, by the way, that website is a treasure trove of information, news, analysis, opinions on the Cincinnati Bengals, their moves, etc. Okay, John, let's do enough of the sappiness, right? Let's do kind of a rundown, and I am sure probably to miss something here in terms of a deal. I'm going to try and do this chronologically. We'll kind of go just update everybody in case you've missed something over the past 3 days. We'll update you on some things. We'll give you numbers and whatnot for these. So bear with us. First day, Monday, when the legal tampering period started, and I may rely on you on some of these numbers for some of these numbers, et cetera, John, if you don't mind. But the Bengals, their first big move and predictable one was they franchise tagged AJ Green. That is about $18 million, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that was their big one. the other predictable one, but what was not predictable is maybe the amount of the restricted free agents that they tendered and at what level. They hung on to Brandon Wilson at the original. All 4 of their 8 guys were original round tenders. So Brandon Wilson, who was at the 6th round tender, the Bengals have a first right of refusal there if there is some sort of offer sheet signed there. And then the rest of the guys were undrafted guys: Ethan Carter, Josh Tupou, and who am I missing there? The
Alex Redmond.
How could I forget? So all of the undrafted guys there, those guys were all tendered, somewhat predictable, and that's kind of what happened on the first day. And then John, you maintained your cool a little bit more for the ensuing day. I was not as chill as you for the second part of Monday and into the first part of Tuesday. You were very zen-like, my friend.
It was all right. So first of all, we were 5 for 5 in terms of the guys who were brought back, or when we did this preview.
That's right. You're right.
A pat on the back for that.
Yep.
Yeah, like I feel that the local media, we did collectively a decent job of trying to translate what the Bengals meant when they said they were going to be more aggressive, because I don't think anybody should have expected them to go out and agree to contracts that they've never had before. It was always about, and at least in my mind, being more aggressive and where free agency is at right now, when free agency is actually beginning, when the league year is beginning, and you're starting to see some smaller, more manageable contracts get signed up. I thought that is what they were meaning in terms of being more aggressive. So when you saw all these contracts with vast amounts of guaranteed money going off the books, and you're like, well, why aren't the Bengals doing anything? Why aren't they being more aggressive? Like I didn't think that that's what they really meant when they said they were going to be more aggressive in terms of what they like to do financially when they bring in guys in the unrestricted free agency. That was never what they were intending to do in terms of what I at least translated from everything that was being said from Duke Tobin. So there was a lot of miscommunications in terms of the expectations of what people expected them to do, specifically at certain positions, and we can talk about linebacker and offensive line in that regard as well. But yeah, like the first day, the first 24 hours of the legal tampering period, there was maybe 1 or 2 contracts that I think would have fit what the Bengals were probably looking to do. One of them was Nick Kwiatkowski, who the linebacker who signed with the Raiders. He signed for like 3 years, $21 million. That was like the one contract that I think Bengals fans should have been upset about the Bengals not matching. And apparently, according to reports, they were in on trying to get him signed. So even still,
and Joe Schobert apparently.
Yeah, exactly. And Joe Sherbert signed for like $53 million, and apparently they were in on thinking about matching for that, or thinking about upping the Jaguars, but they decided they weren't going to overvalue him for that. So yeah, like the vast majority of those contracts were contracts that Bengals fans should not have expected, them to even come close to matching. And then out of nowhere, even after the Schobert fiasco ended, it was less than an hour, and the Bengals made absolute history.
Yeah, I'll let you I'll let you be the bearer of good news, but I'll say this: the thing to tee it up for you, the thing that I really liked about the ensuing moves you're going to talk about is the pivot, the immediate pivot this team made. Instead of crawling into a shell and saying, you know what, we didn't get these guys, now we're not going to spend a lot of money, we're going to just kind of dumpster dive a little bit, and that's where we're going to go. Instead, John, they pivoted within, it seemed like an hour of some of these linebackers coming off the board. They pivoted, and big news hit.
Right, and it was Kwiatkowski, Schobert. Those were the targets at linebacker. When they realized that they couldn't get either of them, it was basically, I think Paul Dana Jr. said it in his article after this all of this went down. Once they realized that they couldn't get Schobert, they pivoted their direction towards, okay, if we're not going to get one of the best linebackers, if we're not going to get a starting linebacker, we're going to focus our attention on some other guys. And apparently, DJ Reader was one of their top free agent targets entering this offseason. They've had their eyes on him for weeks. And out of nowhere, it seemed, they made him the highest paid nose tackle in the NFL. The Bengals signing a free agent during the legal tampering period and making him the highest paid player at his position is like 20 counts of unprecedented. That even for a time like this, where everything in the world is going mad, it still floored me. My legs were shaking when I was trying to break the news on Cincy Jungle. Like the size of the contract is unprecedented for the Bengals, but even that, he's a really, really good player. He is worth
Right.
every penny of that contract. And the 53 million is not the number that we need to concern ourselves. We have yet to see the actual, intricacies of the financials of the contract. I think Jeff Hobson alluded to his cap hit being around 10 million for this year. His signing bonus is still unknown at this point. So the guarantee money is not known for that contract, but it just eclipsed, I think, the value that Javon Hargrave signed when he signed with the Eagles. He signed at about 13 million per year. Reader is about just over 13.2 million a year. So he broke the market for that. But this guy's not just a nose tackle, man. He played 66% of his snaps last year during his best year in Houston, defending the B gap. So that's your 3 tech, your 4 I. That's the same position that Geno Atkins has played. But the idea here is not to just have a guy who you can plug in at nose tackle and just keep him there. He's a guy you can move all around on the defensive line. So yeah, they paid a lot of money for a nose tackle, but he's a nose tackle that can do multiple things. He's a great run stopper, one of the best run stoppers in the NFL. But he can also provide some pressure in against the pass as well. I think he had 36 total pressures for Houston's defensive line on the defensive line with J.J. Watt. He only had a handful of sacks, but he ended up having his career high in quarterback hits as well. So he's really coming into his own at only 25 years old, and that is a talent that you go after in free agency. That is a talent that you go after with a contract of that magnitude. That is a deal that we wanted to see the Bengals make for so long, because not only is it expensive in bringing in a quality player, but it's a smart deal for the caliber player that they are acquiring, and it also fills in a need for what they had on the roster previously, because Andrew Billings, he's a decent player. He's a good young player in his own right, and he's going to make a team happy for whoever signs him. But Reader's just so much better than him in terms of what he does well, and that's saying something for what Billings is. So all in all, it's the best free agent signing in the history of this team, and it happened less than an hour after we thought everything was going to be the same because they missed out on all the starting linebackers.
Yeah, so DJ Reader, one of the best players overall in free agency that was available, probably by Pro Football Focus standards, he was the number 2 interior defensive lineman that was available in free agency. When do you ever hear the Bengals do that? I mean, it's just like, wow, elite player, a lot of years left in him, right? He's just 25. He's really kind of coming into. They're getting a guy that is in his prime. And he's a good player who was in his prime. I'm put up for those of you watching live. You get to see John's beautiful face simultaneously, not only on the video feed but on his Twitter account. You see the snap counts. A defensive tackle, nose tackle, defensive end in terms of the spots he played for the Houston Texans. That's the beauty of this guy. He's 6'3", 6'4", I believe. He's close to 350 pounds. I think he's in the 340s. And look at where you can maneuver him around up front. And this move, if you get a Ryan Glasgow back, who, by the way, is an effective player when he's healthy. The problem is he just hasn't been healthy. But if you get a Ryan Glasgow back, you've got Hubbard, you've got Lawson, you've got, maybe a Derek Wolfe coming in. They've been sniffing around edge rushers the early part of free agency. What is this team like? They like versatility. They like guys that can do multiple things. And a lot of teams like that aspect. But that's what Reader, he's not just a big guy. Unfortunately, I liked Andrew Billings. I think you did too as a football player. He really showed improvement. He's far more limited into what he can do than what DJ Reader can do. That's right. The bottom line. And you can move Reader around. He's not a guy you keep on the field for only 1 down, maybe 2 downs. He is a guy you can put out there for multiple downs at multiple spots. So DJ Reader, the big, the crown jewel of the Bengals free agency period thus far. Then, John, not too long after that, I mean, you got Trey Waynes, the cornerback, one of the bigger names on the market. I think he was top 4, top 5 by PFF standards in terms of available corners. Not an all-around shut-down corner, but high-end athleticism, high-end speed, decent size, physical guy, and a guy that'll help out in the run. This team wanted to clamp down on the run, as weird as it sounds for a cornerback, to covet a cornerback to help out in that respect. That's what they want out of this defense. They need to stop the run. This division likes to run the football, right? I mean, Pittsburgh runs the ball with no matter who they have back there. Cleveland has Nick Chubb. You've got the multiple look offense of the Baltimore Ravens. You got to be able to stop the run in this division. And even if it's from a cornerback perspective, Not necessarily the trait you specifically look for, but he has shown high ability there. I think you probably put him at a Dre Kirkpatrick plus, especially with his age. That may not blow everybody's hair back, but an upgrade is an upgrade. We're going to talk more about Dre Kirkpatrick later. You've got some interesting information on that as well, John. But Trey Wayne signs for the Bengals. Another 3-year deal there, and big news there. We'll talk more about the pros and cons of that deal going forward. Then on the departure side, and let me know if I forget anybody, you had cornerback Darqueze Dennard shortly after the signing of Trey Wayne's. Really kind of a minimal deal that was reported. 3 years, $13.5 million, I believe, was the number there. So that was a little surprising. Bengals decided not to hang on to him. You had
Clayton Fedulum was the first.
Clayton Fedulum was the first domino to fall. He went to Miami, Miami's just been stockpiling players. So those two departures there were kind of the most notable. Am I missing anybody? We've covered quite a bit. I think that's most of pretty much what's happened so far as we sit here tonight.
Yes.
In terms of the Bengals transactions or departures.
Those were the two unrestricted free agents that they had leave, but they also cut a couple guys as well.
There you go. Yep.
Right. So the day after they signed Trey Waynes, they released BW Webb earlier this morning on Wednesday morning. They saved about $2.5 million of cap space. Surprisingly, did not designate him as a post June 1st cap release.
Right.
But a good friend of the program, Andre Parada, tweeted out earlier that that's normally what the Bengals do. They like to absorb all that dead money as soon as possible and not put it on the books for future years. So just take those losses as soon as possible. And that's exactly what they did about an hour later with right guard John Miller. They released him for about $2.5 million of cap space, $2.5 million of dead cap as well. Did not designate him as a post June 1st cap release. And that was surprising as well because, I think for the most part, for the better part of this offseason, we've heard a lot of rumors about right guard being the spot of pure competition this offseason with talent coming from outside the organization. There's going to be a competition at right tackle between Bobby Hart and Fred Johnson. That's very much known. The spot of right guard, though, that was more under the microscope with the team seeming to have confidence in Michael Jordan holding down the left guard spot. But even so, like I would have thought that John Miller would have been a part of that competition rather than just bringing in an extra guy along with him. But the sudden release of Miller, early in the free agency period, that was, I think, surprising to say the least. And you wouldn't think that they would do that unless they had an eventual replacement up their sleeve. And it turns out that's exactly what they did because later in the day they signed left guard from Dallas, Xavier Su'a-Filo, and he was the backup to Connor Williams at left guard for the past 2 years for the Cowboys after originally spending the first 4 years with the Houston Texans, the team that drafted him 33rd overall in the 2014 draft. I think in terms, it's a very similar signing to that of Trey Waynes, whereas the guy that you would assume that he's replacing Trey Waynes, obviously assuming to replace Drake Kirkpatrick, Su'a-Filo replacing Miller, it doesn't really move the needle in terms of being a noticeable upgrade. I think that when you factor in the age, Su'a-Filo is actually 2.5 years older than John Miller, even though they're only separated by one draft class. But there is more athleticism with Su'a-Filo. There is more potential upside in terms of, he hasn't really been a starter of late. He had to work his way back into that role in Dallas, but the past 2 years have been more positive than the first 4 years of his career. So I think this is the Bengals kind of betting on that trend kind of continuing, maybe penciling him in as a starter as of now, but maybe hoping to bring one or two more guys maybe in the draft to potentially compete with him. But that is, at the very least, a progressive move to attempt to upgrade the offensive line because John Miller, as decent as he wasn't a talent that you can just ignore that position entirely. I appreciate them trying to do something at guard. I'm just not sure that Su'a-Filo is going to be this long-term answer, even though he did sign a 3-year deal.
Yeah, and I think he provides another guy who provides positional flexibility at both guard spots. We had 17 Burke. Where is he going to play it? By indications, at least from the beat writers, et cetera, he is a guy that is going to be they're going to look at him at right guard. And they may go with Michael Jordan at left guard, Billy Price at left guard, to be determined. But like you said, John, they may kind of scrum it out with those three and then maybe another rookie or two. I've got my Twitter account on the screen here, and just a little bit of Pro Football Focus and other tidbits of information on Suafilo. So, 60.1 overall grade, kind of a spot starter guy last year. So, not. I think he, is a guy that they may look at as a very short-term type of solution as they maybe groom some of these other guys. But yes, thank you for catching us up on some of the more recent ones after we kind of went through the first 2 days. You kind of caught us up on some of the things of today, Wednesday. So thank you for that. But that's about where we're at with the Cincinnati Bengals. It took us 20 minutes or so to get there. But that's about where we're at for the Bengals and what's ahead, or what they've done so far, rather. So they've got maybe some more work to do, but you could argue that 3 upgrades have been made, at least to potential starting positions. Speaking of that, John, now that we've got kind of the context and the layout of everything they've done, let's kind of go a little pros and cons. It may be harder to find some of each for each player in each contract, depending, of some of these additions and subtractions. Okay. I guess we could start with the easy one, which is DJ Reader, because that was the biggest and most notable signing, and probably the one that we would all be most excited about. Kind of pros for me: size, versatility, age, fit in the division, and like I said earlier, that pivot from not, you didn't get your linebackers you wanted, and instead of doing what the Bengals usually do, you didn't crawl in a shell for free agency. You went out and got another high-level player.
At the time that he was signed, it was the 3rd most expensive contract per spot track in terms of just total money. Now, total money is whatever. It's the guaranteed money that matters, but just seeing the Bengals that high, and not only that high in terms of the contract that they gave, it was a really good player. I cannot harp this enough. Like, Bengals fans have wanted the Bengals to be more active in free agency. That's all good and dandy, but it's not just about just throwing money at a bad player like we've seen so often. And those types of contracts, they ruin teams. They set teams back multiple years because their cap flexibility just gets thrown out the window. It is a big contract for a really big and really good player, and that's very important to note. Like, this is the biggest contract that they've given out in team history, but it's for a really good player. He's really good because, like you said, you can play him on multiple techniques on this defensive line, and versatility only goes so far. That label only goes so far for as long as you're good at those positions. And he's good wherever you line him up because he can rush the passer, he can defend the run. He's not only a menacing presence on the defensive line, but he knows what to do with his hands. For being 6'3.5", 6'4", he plays with really good leverage. He's what Mike Mack would call the bubble butt. He's got that base to him, and he's just impossible to move. I know Jeff Hobson talked about, he held his own against Quentin Nelson against the Colts, and Nelson still had some good reps on him, but that's the standard at guard, and he did indeed held his own. He has experience playing against him for 2 years now in the AFC South. The ability to put someone next to Geno Atkins and have him be almost an equally dominant presence is something that the Bengals have never had. It's something that we've wanted for so long, and they've missed so often in the draft. Brandon Thompson, Devin Still, Marcus Hardison, just these constant whiffs about guys that you want to either spell Geno or give him some help next to him on all 3 downs. Reader is the guy to do that, and I think that's the biggest pro that you can have with this signing.
Yeah. I watched some film, like a little bit of limited film last night after the signing, and I saw a lot of positives. I saw a guy that was, like you said, very difficult to move at the point of attack because of his size and the way he plays. Very difficult to move. But I also saw a guy for that size that is relatively fleet of foot. I mean, he can move around, and he can move laterally for a guy that is, that massive of size. It's pretty impressive. I think we all know the pros. I'm not, in terms of cons, I'm not even really concerned about the contract because, people say, oh, if for some reason this doesn't work out, this will just put them back in their shell again. Let's just not doom and gloom the thing too much. Really, from a player standpoint, John, and I don't want to nitpick, and I don't want to. The one concern I have is that he was surrounded by talent. He was surrounded by significant talent around him. J.J. Watt, Whitney Merciless. I mean, a lot of people that needed to be game plan for on that defense. So, there is maybe a little bit of something that says, he may command a little more attention, especially with that contract now. He may command a little bit more attention from opposing offenses and offensive lines going forward. And he is not a stat line guy, but we know the stats don't tell the entire story with him and his effectiveness in the defense. That's really my only, I don't want to say a con. I would say it's a concern in terms of bringing in the player. Did you like what I did there? It's just more of, but the good news is he's got a Geno Atkins, he's got a Carlos Dunlap, he's got a Sam Hubbard, he's got other guys around him that are also pretty dang good players, but it just has to translate. That's really my only concern. It's a very minor one. I think this is a hell of a pickup for the team though, overall.
Right. And again, he can provide that presence that we've wanted next to Geno for so many years, but he's not going to be the guy that even comes close to equaling him in terms of pressures and sacks. Like he's not a primarily he's not a pass rusher. Any value that he adds to the pass rusher, it's a plus. We can expect him to provide more than we had with Billings and other guys who've manned that position in the past. But your main value as a defensive lineman is what can you add in the pass rush, and that's never going to be his primary value. And that's, I guess, the one minor con here, because he's primarily a run defender, but he's a really good run defender, and he's a pretty decent pass rusher for what he brings to the table. So if it is a con, it's a very minor one as well.
Yeah. And I would say, overall, the pros is the data, the production, and everything shows you that this is a guy on the ascent. He's not on the downside of his career. He's kind of entering the prime. Let's go to Trey Waynes. You got pros with him off the bat, signing with the Bengals.
Right. I think in terms of what he brings compared to Drake Kirkpatrick, he's only an upgrade when you go down, trait by trait. He's a better tackler. He's more physical. He's faster and quicker as an athlete. And that's the things that we've heard repeatedly about the signing. They wanted somebody who was a more physical presence on the perimeter. You saw time and time again last year, especially when Dark Wisenar wasn't healthy. They got shredded alive on these outside runs because they didn't have any cornerbacks who can set that outside edge. Their tackling was porous from both Drake Kirkpatrick and William Jackson. He's a much better tackler than both those guys. That is the upgrade. That is the main upgrade that he brings. He'll be able to go up close to the line of scrimmage and work his way in press coverage and out physical guys that they haven't had that before. And not even Darius Phillips to an extent can do that, because he's on the smaller side as well. And that's, I guess, why they're focusing on putting him in the slot now with both Dark Wisenar and BWM gone. So those are the pros. He's definitely a more physical player than Drake Kirkpatrick. If he ultimately does take that role, he's only a plus in that way. The con here, I guess, is that he's basically the same player in coverage, and that's the whole thing. He's better in the areas that are less important for cornerbacks, but he's essentially the same player in areas that are more important for cornerbacks. Your main value as a cornerback is how you can mean coverage. If you don't have ball skills, you're basically an average starter at best, and that's what Trey Waynes was in Minnesota. There's a reason why Minnesota fans and general NFL fans saw this contract, $42 million over 3 years, and thought Trey Waynes got that. Like, that's Marcus Peters money. That's very close to what the market value for this position is. Byron Jones got like 16.5. James Bradbury got 14.5. Trey Waynes got $14 million. That's paid like a high-end starter, and that's just not what he is. Like, even if he's not technically the number one quarterback on this team, there's still opportunities for defenses to expose him in coverage, and that's what the Packers did on a biannual basis. Devontae Adams constantly went off on this guy because teams had an easy opportunity to pick on him multiple times a game. He's just not a high-end starter in terms of what is actually valuable in cornerbacks, and that's what definitely worries me about how much the Bengals actually value this guy for the amount of money that they gave him. Like, it's okay to admit that they overpaid for him. It's okay to admit that they overvalued him. I don't believe there was any type of bidding war. I don't believe that the Bengals do this. I don't believe that they give out these contracts unless they believe that these players actually valued this much. It's okay to assume that the Bengals overvalued what Trey Waynes was, even if he's only an upgrade in trait by trait against Drake Kirkpatrick.
Yeah, and I think in terms of cons, Dean Burke in our live YouTube chat summed it up well. He said Trey Wayne's an upgrade on Kirkpatrick, but the numbers aren't as good as they can or should be. Really, it's the should be. First round pick. I think he was he top 16, top half of the first round when he was selected. The traits are there. It just hasn't materialized, right? I mean, you've got the talent, but the production and some of the tape doesn't match up there. That's my concern with this whole thing. The pros to it, we'll get to that a bit more, but the pros to it is this secondary is looking very athletic and very speedy, which is good. I mean, you've got William Jackson, who ran in the 4.3s at 40 in college. You've got Darius Phillips, extremely athletic, a guy you can move around to a lot of different places, kind of a turnover machine or a big play machine when he's out there. So you got him. You've now got Waynes, who ran in the 4.3s. You still have Kirkpatrick, who has good speed for his age. As of now, he's still on the team. You've got some possible playmakers in that secondary, and the hope is that maybe being surrounded with some talent, you bring in a DJ Reader up front to maybe add a little pressure up front, which always makes secondaries look a little better than they may actually be. So I like the move from kind of adding to a defense, a supplemental guy. I don't know if I'm wording this well. I like him as a supplemental piece to the defense. I don't like him as a centerpiece to the defense. I don't. And I think for the money that the Bengals gave him, I think most people would look at it and say, well, that's kind of a centerpiece to a defense because that is big time money for a cornerback. I don't like looking at him that way, and I don't like that the contract seems to be designed that way. I like the fact that he would be a supplemental piece, and by the way, John, we said this before we took the air. The Bengals love those first round corners, man. They love them. Whether they draft them on their own or they bring them in from other teams. You can go back to Newman and Adam Jones and Kirkpatrick. I mean, you can go all the way back. They love to collect first round players in the secondary and at cornerback. So you've got technically what should be a talented player in the secondary, another first round pick. So in that respect, I like it. I don't absolutely love it because of the contract, but I like the player overall, and I think it is an upgrade, in some respects.
Bouncing off of that, in case you forgot, this is the same team that drafted 3 first-round corners in 5 years. They obviously value the position really high, and I think as soon as they saw the position deteriorate to the point where it's one of the main causes why this defense is the worst, they got to work in improving it. That's why they signed a couple of street free agents, I think, right after the season ended, in Winston Rose and Tony Brown. That's why they were so, that's why they're so adamant about turning the whole position group around. And that's why there were reports about this being one of the positions that they were going to be aggressive to attack. And if, obviously they don't value the linebacker position very much because they still continue to not spend in it. But they reminded us that they still value cornerback really high. And, if there's a type of athlete, if there's a type of player to bet on kind of hitting a stride in the second half of his career, Waynes is kind of fits that mold because he is really fast. He is still athletic. That's not going to go away. We saw that kind of with Terrence Newman, who kind of revitalized his career with the Bengals, that albeit much older, but that's the similar type of athlete that didn't have exactly the greatest ball skills downfield. Those are traits, unfortunately, ball skills and just general coverage ability that don't really develop over time if it hasn't already. But I think there's still a chance that Waynes can kind of, flatten out to be a more consistent and stable player. And at that point, at that point, as long as he becomes more consistent, you can kind of live with the value of his contract. But until we see then, it's more of a wait and see type of situation.
Yeah, and just a side note with this as well, before we move on to talking about the pros and cons with other contracts, et cetera, with this team. I did see some statistics that show Trey Waynes is pretty capable on third down. And that in itself is a big trait. This team over the last couple of years has really struggled to get off the field on third down. Waynes has had some issues. You mentioned Devontae Adams has kind of had his way with him, with the Packers there, but apparently some of the numbers prove that he's pretty good on third down. when targeted. So you got to like that, I would assume.
Yeah, sure. Like that's definitely a problem for them going forward. So again, I think they recognize definite weaknesses that they had, and they targeted a guy they felt that filled them, and that the bare bones, that's a positive. But again, like I'm seeing a lot of people saying, just be happy that they spend, just be happy that they're bringing in different talent. It goes beyond that, man. It's not just about spending money for each. That was never the point. It was about spending enough money to get actually good players. And I don't know if Wayne's particularly qualifies to that because he's a marginal upgrade at best over the starter that they had. But I guess in general, it's a step in the right direction, but we just got to see if he can actually develop into a better player.
Okay, so pros and cons of Xavier Su'a-Filo.
Pros. I like the trend of his career over the past couple of years. He came to Dallas as a backup. He was a spot starter. He became a more consistent player. Like, the reason why he was drafted, so high back in 2014, he was a really good athlete. I think he tested in the 99th or 96th percentile in the short shuttle, pretty high in the 3-cone and the 40-yard dash. Very athletic in the areas that you want your guards to be. So, obviously they went out and drafted Michael Jordan last year, one of the more athletic guards in that class. They have a guy, Jonah Williams, who can handle a lot of zone schemes. You can do a lot of things for Trey Hopkins as well. So I feel it kind of fits the mold of, I think they still want to go into this primarily zone blocking scheme up front, and he fits the mold more than what a John Miller did, who, wasn't exactly the biggest presence, but didn't exactly really fit a lot of those zone concepts. And he played a lot better when they went into more gap stuff. So in terms of, I think, of the direction that they wanted to go, the athlete that Su'a-Filo is kind of fits that. And he seemed to have been hitting his stride last year when he had to start. He had more consistent grading from Pro Football Focus when he was part of that offensive line. So, in terms of, finding positives, there are some to be found. Cons, he's 29 years old, and he's yet to become a consistent starter in the NFL, and that's definitely concerning. There were definite issues of him coming out of college at UCLA. He had the athleticism, but there were definite technical issues that led him to be a very, very inconsistent player in Houston. Like, I think he was, tasked with 40-plus pressures in back-to-back years, part of that offensive line. It's one of the reasons why that offensive line kind of went downhill to the point to where it is now, where they had to completely rebuild it to that point. Like, there's a reason why Houston didn't bring him back, and there's a reason why he didn't sign to become a starter in his next team. So this is, again, it's taking a risk on a player who seemed to have been hitting his stride, more so towards the later part of his career. He still has that athleticism. I think that's, something that the Bengals will value, but this is taking a risk on a below average player at this point to become an average starter at this point.
Yeah. And that's the pros for me: affordable contract. Affordable contract on what could be a marginal upgrade from what they saw from Miller in 13 games last year. Pass blocking is his forte. He was the number one, the highest rated pass blocking guard by Pro Football Focus metrics, but very limited sample size. So
right.
One sack given up, one penalty given up, you like that, but again, very limited sample size because he wasn't the starter for the whole year. So there's a lot of yeah buts with this guy. Yeah, a lot, very athletic, as you mentioned, never translated really fully to the pros. Good pass blocking grades of recent years, hasn't really translated for full seasons. I loved this kid when he was at UCLA. I saw quite a bit of him. I loved this kid in college, and I thought the Bengals would have been all over him when he came out. I just thought he would have been a good fit for them. And I was a little disappointed with his performance. Different player, but same kind of career arc. And I liken it because the Bengals actually offered this guy a deal. If you remember a couple of years ago, the Bengals signed Deuce Latui.
Oh my God, yeah.
Yeah, and he failed his physical with the Bengals, but he was going to be a guy. Now, he was more of the power road grader guy, the big guy that you kind of expect a bit more out of your right guard. But same kind of deal. I remember him being a dominant player at USC, never really became that same guy at the next level. You kind of thought you'd see a Mike Upati early pre-injury type of guy, and that never really materialized. Same thing with Xavier Su'a-Filo. I feel like he never really hit what could have been in the pros. And I think at best, this is maybe a bridge type of guy as the Bengals bring in a probably day 3 guy to maybe compete for a spot or groom going forward. I think, best case scenario, if you have him at right guard, you have Michael Jordan at left. If Michael Jordan starts to falter, maybe you could swap Xavier Su'a-Filo to the left, and then you bring in Billy Price, or however you want to work that. It gives them a few more options. It gives them an inexpensive option by Pro Football Focus metrics. It's a marginal upgrade over John Miller, but again, the sample size doesn't really equate to that. That's kind of my pros and cons and take on it.
Yeah, and again, like we have Dean Burke in the comments section. Another pro is Xavier's a veteran on the line. Our offensive line's very young. That's very true because I think Jeff Hobson said he's tied with Bobby Hart like the most starts for any player on this offensive line. And okay, that's fine. Experience is experience. It just depends on how much quality that experience is. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of quality starts to Su'a-Filo's name. Another con for me though is that this guy's a career left guard. Like, he never played on the right side in college. He was a left tackle and a left guard at UCLA. He's played 2 of however many games he's played in the NFL at right guard. He's only been at left guard, and there seems to be a plan for him to, at the very least, compete for that right guard spot. But it's such a definitive plan that it's just curious to me as to how confident they are in this guy playing a completely different position. People think that left guards and right guards, they can just change sides all the time. It's just not necessarily the case, especially if you don't have the experience to do so. Like, again, versatility only goes so far as long as you're capable of playing multiple spots. So at the very least, Michael Jordan had experience playing right guard at Ohio State. I think there was like a video that released to Twitter last week of him working out in some type of offseason program, and he was taking pass sets from that right guard spot. So I thought that could have been something that could have, signaled a definite change in terms of where we would see guys on the offensive line. And specifically with Su'a-Filo being a primary left guard, you would think that he would be more comfortable filling that spot. So, again, you're counting on a guy to be a much better player than he has been in the first 6 years of his career at a completely new position. I'm not comfortable with him being the penciled-in starter at a position that he's rarely, if not ever, played. And I would definitely hope that they would address the position and address some form of competition very early in the draft. And they have met with a lot of guards at the combine, and they were said to meet with some other guards, some quality guards for some pre-draft visits before they all got canceled due to COVID-19. But, hopefully that does get addressed in the draft.
Yeah. Positional versatility, potentially limited snaps at right guard, but positional versatility, veteran, and, a guy that, as you bring in a new quarterback in what all but seems to be Joe Burrow, you like a guy's forte to be as more of a pass protector to keep your quarterback upright. But like you said, limitations, not really hitting where the career arc should be. And, not really a needle mover in terms of a move. Let's go to the other side now that we've talked about the additions. Let's quickly talk about the pros and cons of some of these guys who left the Bengals. Darqueze Dennard, let's start there. I don't see a guy in terms of cons of letting him walk. I don't see a guy that the Bengals currently employ that seems to be as capable in the slot as he was. I feel like he was very good in the slot. He was adequate on the outside, average-ish, maybe slightly above average on the outside, and that's being kind. I don't see kind of that gritty, tough, guy who is willing to and be effective against tight ends, against those shifty slot receivers. I see a lot of, athletic boundary guys. I don't see the slot guy. Not that Dennard was not athletic, but you understand what I'm saying. The length guys, right. The more boundary corners, as opposed to a guy who will contribute a lot in the run defense game, can blitz the quarterback and can cover some of the tougher targets. That's the cons for me. Also apparently that he could have been had for what seems like a marginal deal. That seems like a very manageable deal apparently to what he got in Jacksonville. But the thing is, John, he's just rarely available. He's missed so much time, and I think if that wasn't, I mean, even if that was just a small concern instead of a large concern, maybe we'd be talking about him re-signing. But it's just the availability factor. This team needs guys to be there, especially if they're going to pay him decent money.
Exactly, and I think the fact that he's had durability issues is why he only got, I think, about $4.5 million average per year from the Jaguars. But I'm happy for him because he definitely wanted a bigger role on defense. He sees himself as a more integral part on defense, a guy who can perform on the boundary in that way, and that's part of the reason why this relationship was kind of doomed to end, and we were kind of seeing the rumors and the writing on the wall as early as the beginning of the offseason. But you're exactly right. For all this talk about what Trey Waynes brings from a physicality standpoint, you're losing your best tackle cornerback in Dark West Bernard. You don't have that physical presence in the slot anymore. Darius Phillips, he played more in the slot in his rookie year before transitioning to a boundary guy in his second year, but you don't know if he can bring that same physical presence. And run defending is so much more important for guys, lining up closer to the formation, and that was such a plus whenever Denard was out there. The run defense was definitely a lot more stout because that edge was set more fiercely, and you had guys funneling back inside, and it made the linebackers' jobs a lot more easier. So that's definitely a void that they have to fill, whether it be with a guy on the roster or a guy in the draft. But again, like obviously good for him and for finding a bigger role, but that room is now really crowded, and hopefully some other guys find some new opportunities. And and unfortunately, it was just a relationship that never really fulfilled to what you would like a first round pick to be, and it's primarily because of those those mixed aspirations of what he wanted to be, and unfortunately, he just never stayed healthy for the Bengals to commit to him long term.
Yeah, let's go to some of the voluntary guys they let go. I guess we'll start with BW Webb because he was the first that kind of came across the news wire. I mean, I guess there's not a lot of cons to really the contract he got out of a kind of a contract that it was a 3-year deal that was kind of a lot for a guy that you had initially pegged to be like your fourth corner.
Right.
I guess the only thing that I would say that is a con is, did he really get the fairest shake, I guess, with Cincinnati? And what I mean by that is he was thrown into a starting role that was not what they wanted for him. They wanted him to be, kind of their number 3, number 4 cornerback. He had a broken arm when he was thrown into the starting role and was out there with a cast. It's just kind of like you're throwing a guy out there with limitations, and it's spotlighted because of an injury and because of his own, deficiencies as a player, when your expectations for him were going to be something along the lines of a number 3, number 4 cornerback, and you would have been comfortable with that because he's an experienced guy and, what have you, but not as your number 2, number 1 cornerback, which happened to be the case towards the end of the season. So on one hand, I feel a little unfair piling on him. He did not play well, but I think there are other factors at play with that. So that's kind of the only con I can say in getting rid of him. And, the experience factor, you've now got some guys behind some of the top guys with a little less experience. But, I mean, overall, it just makes sense. Get out of that deal.
Exactly. Like, you're not missing anything, even with the healthy BW Webb. And the healthy BW Webb is a rosterable player. And I think that's why ESPN Bengals reporter Ben Baby said that the Bengals, he wouldn't be surprised if they re-signed Webb later this offseason in case they had issues at cornerback. Mm-hmm. For now, it was just a way to save cap space, because prior to a couple days ago, he had one of the bigger contracts on this team, and that was the state of the salary cap with this team. So, you're not really missing anything with him. Even when he was healthy, like you said, it was unfortunate that he, was thrown onto the field with that cast on his hand. And definitely made the situation worse for him. So, it's like whatever. You're not missing that good of a player even when he was healthy.
Yep. So let's move on to John Miller. I mean, we talked a lot about Xavier Su'a-Filo. I mean, I guess my big beef with letting him go is, why the rush? Why not to say why save that money if you really weren't going to go for someone maybe a little more higher profile or higher end than Xavier Suafilo. That was just not a guy that was on my radar at all for this team. I would have thought like an Andrews Pete for a guard would have been a decent addition. Another guy though whose career arc hasn't been reached either, but a guy that you could start him at guard in a pinch, maybe play him at tackle type of thing. I don't know. I guess I'm kind of like, why the rush to get that contract off the books to get a guy that is seemingly a marginal improvement? That's kind of my take on that. I guess I also kind of was he that bad? I don't know. I guess I'm kind of, it wasn't great, but is what you're getting and replacing him with, is that really going to be such a large improvement? That's kind of my issue with it. Otherwise, it's kind of like, well, if you were just kind of dissatisfied with the deal, get out of that one too. But I don't know.
Like, it's not like the Bengals were so cap strapped and so close to the cap that they had to make this move. It just seems like, they were, I guess, generally unsatisfied with the play that they got from him. The fact that he was, he was probably one of the more expensive unrestricted free agent signings that they've ever had from an external free agent when they signed him. It was by far the biggest that they had last year and the biggest that they had in recent memory. So the fact that they got out of that deal after a year is another unprecedented move for the organization. But, if John Miller is your worst offensive lineman, you have a pretty good offensive line. The problem was he was maybe their second best last year behind Trey Hopkins.
Right.
He definitely provided a lot of consistency when he was healthy. And, that is something that they, it's a question mark going forward. Is Suafilo going to give you the same level of consistency when you're having a fully healthy right guard out there that Miller did? Because 5 out of 12 games he started last year, he didn't allow a single pressure. He had some really good games for the Bengals last year. He, I thought, brought the exact value that he signed for in the offseason. I think he was one of the better value players that they had on the team and one of the better value players at the position last year. And there's a reason why he got signed almost immediately after he was let go. He signed a 1 year, $4 million deal with the Panthers just hours after he was let go. The Panthers obviously needed a guard after they traded away Trey Turner. So I think he'll give him the same type of production down there. He's just a solid starter in the league. And, if you want to upgrade at that position over John Miller, I have no problem with that because he's definitely not the type of player that he's definitely not the player that you say, hey, we have John Miller, we don't need to upgrade here. If you want to bring in a high upside guy in the draft, or if you want to bring in a clear upgrade in free agency, over Miller, that's completely fine. The fact that their solution to here was Suafilo is very confusing to me, and I'm not exactly sure I see the plan here. But again, if they had done moves like this, in the past where they were unsatisfied with like mediocre players, that's something that we would have been for. It's just the exact route that they had with this plan is a little bit confusing, and I think that's my one reservation with it.
Yeah. Like I said, if you're going to get rid of it, if you're going to get rid of the guy, make it for a move that really seems to be a more than a slightly marginal upgrade.
Exactly.
So let's quickly, before we move on, just do kind of the group of the restricted free agents in terms of pros and cons. Cons, I don't know about the tender level, especially when it comes to a guy like Brandon Wilson. I don't think anyone's really going to come sniffing for him, but you maybe wanted to be a little safer there. But for me, that's one area. Ethan Carter, is that? Special teams, I get it, and I guess that makes sense if you weren't going to keep Clayton Fedulum, but I don't know about that one. Alex Redmond, same kind of thing. He just keeps hanging around. They like something out of him, so really, I guess I like the fact that they kept these guys that are valuable at minimum camp bodies, where Brandon Wilson was almost a Pro Bowl type of guy as a return man. So I like they hung on to him, but I guess if you look at significant roles for some of these guys, I don't know.
They're not going to have significant roles, right? Like you're not going to start Josh Tupou at nose tackle because you have DJ Reader here. You have Brandon Wilson presumably stepping up as some type of Clayton Fedulum player on special teams because, he has that similar athleticism, and I think they value him in that way. And he's going to rotate it in that safety, in that rotation, in that secondary. Carter's just a fine special teams player, and Redmond's just going to be around for camp to see what he can do at guard. So there's no real cons in tendering these guys. There would be some cons in tendering, like Hardy Nickerson or somebody like that. But at the end of the day, these guys are around because they have whatever value that they have for the things that they do. So it's whatever.
This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. We've been talking about the recent happenings with the club in free agency. We've been doing some pros and cons as it pertains to the contracts that came and went with the Cincinnati Bengals as we are just on the precipice of the start of the 2020 league year. Thank you for being with us. We're going to be with you for a few minutes longer, talking about what could be ahead for the Cincinnati Bengals, so stick with us. As I mentioned before, you can get this show on a number of different audio platforms: iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, Megaphone, iHeartRadio, really wherever you get your audio podcasts. Get the show there. Subscribe to our channels. You can also get the videos at our YouTube channel or on cincyjungle.com. And, of course, keep it to cincyjungle.com for a number of different pieces of news, opinions, analysis, all that good stuff.
Yeah, so we had someone in the comment section ask what the Bengals salary cap situation looks like, and we're gonna go through like the projected cap hits for the signings and whatnot, and just kind of get a general idea where we are. AJ Green cost $18 million. The four tenders that they had were going to cost about $8.5 million. According to Jeff Hobson, the cap hits for DJ Reader, Trey Waynes, and Xavier Su'a-Filo is going to come to about $23 million. So when you add all those up, that's just about $50 million in total spending for the 2020 season. They had about 55 million in terms of cap space, and then you clear out John Miller, you clear out BWO, that clears about $5 million there. So rough estimate, just about $10 million in cap space right now, but that is not including getting rid of Dalton's contract, and that's kind of leading into where we go from here. Like what happens now? They address defensive line, they address cornerback, they I guess kind of address offensive line at right guard, but you still have definite questions. You have guys who are still free agents that may or may not be brought back, and you have guys that may or may not be cut or traded. So just to start off, what I heard this afternoon from a source that I'm not going to name, but he has ears inside the organization. And he told me with extreme confidence that Dre Kirkpatrick is not going anywhere. Not that he's not going to be traded, but that he's not going to be cut in general. Now, Dre Kirkpatrick was a guy that many people had pegged as, a clear cap casualty, a guy that if you bring in a guy like Trey Waynes, you would assume that Dre Kirkpatrick, there's no more starting spots at boundary corner. They still like William Jackson. His 2020 salary cap is now guaranteed after the league year started, so he's getting paid $10 million. You're paying Trey Waynes about $20 million in actual real cash because of the signing bonus and the roster bonus and everything that comes with that. So you think, where is Drake Kirkpatrick going to play? And there's no real clear answer to that. You have three bodies that have only played on the boundary, and you have maybe only the slot, starting position is open. But apparently they still like Dre. It would take a miracle for them to move on with him via trade. They're not exactly pushed up against the salary cap at this point, even whatever they might say. But according to what I heard, he's staying for now. Maybe things change later in the offseason when they like enough from Waynes and Jackson and starting at those starting spots, and they see Kirkpatrick as maybe a roster cut at the end of building the final roster. But for now, Drake Kirkpatrick is staying. We cannot say the same thing about Andy Dalton, though. And there's been a lot of news and movements on the quarterback trade market. Unfortunately, the Bears traded for Nick Foles and Andy Dalton, and they got their fourth round compensatory pick from that, and they are going to restructure Nick Foles' contract to even take on that deal. And they got a lot of heat for that. So I guess the Bengals wouldn't budge from their desire for one of their second round picks, and so that really only leaves you got to think the New England Patriots are the favorites at this point. If Andy Dalton gets traded at all, they seem like the one and only logical solution to this, because Brady's obviously in Tampa Bay, Los Angeles. The Chargers have pulled themselves out of the quarterback market, according to Ian Rappaport. There's just no other landing spots possible for Andy Dalton if you still want to trade him. And, his contract is not going to be on the books. They're still clear intent on moving on from him. But at this point, whatever the Patriots want, just give it to them. I don't think that they should be cued in these negotiations. This can't turn into another AJ McCarron type situation. You're not working up against a deadline where, a wrong fax machine can ruin this whole thing. But at this point, if you can get anything for Andy Dalton, you've lost all leverage, and you should do whatever you can to do so.
Nick Foles to Chicago. Tom Brady to Tampa Bay. You mentioned Chargers are kind of out of the quarterback derby, the veteran quarterback derby. Indianapolis grabbed Phillip Rivers. There's not a lot of options out there in terms of the Bengals dealing Andy Dalton somewhere. Unless you have a Miami Dolphins team that maybe wants some sort of – if their plan is to take Tua and maybe they want to give Tua a little time, a redshirt type of season, and you want to make a deal for an Andy Dalton as a bridge guy, and you want to, that makes some sense potentially. Maybe Jacksonville, now that they moved on from Nick Foles, they seem to like Gardner Minshew. I don't know that makes sense. Chargers could be playing things close to the vest, and maybe they just put out the rumor about we're content with Tyrod Taylor as opposed to maybe an Andy Dalton. There are not a lot of options for the Cincinnati Bengals. The only thing I would disagree with you on, John, in terms of your stance of you can't get cute with this, if the Bengals are pretty content in terms of what they have allocated to outside free agency, maybe even what they will allocate to inside free agency going forward, they may sit back and wait with Andy Dalton and say, we're going to wait till the draft and see what teams miss out on a possible quarterback, and then someone may come calling, kind of like a Josh Rosen thing. Or they may wait until camps and teams see what they may have in their quarterback positions. Maybe, God forbid, an injury happens, and that's when a team comes knocking for an Andy Dalton, maybe even giving you a bit more than what has been offered now because of desperation. It's a gamble. It's a big risk to play that game. But if you're dead set and if you're dead set on getting a certain amount, a certain value for Andy Dalton and what you think you can get for him, maybe you hang on to him if you're not going to spend a lot more money. Maybe you hang on to that contract for the time being, and then you try and maximize that. I still think, though, John, to your point, I still think that the Bengals would be wisest to get rid of that contract, to get rid of that player as much as possible, not only to free up money to get more impactful players, but also to potentially get a draft pick to immediately use. That is not what they would get if they wait till summer.
Right. And like you said, there could be a scenario where they trade him during the draft and maybe his value goes up with that. Because I just remember watching the draft last year and thinking, like, the Cardinals completely messed this up. There's no way they're going to get anywhere near what they want with Josh Rosen. They ended up getting a second-round pick. So it's possible that kind of happens, even though the situations with what Rosen was and what Dalton is a little bit different in that sense. But, I mean, to your point, like, I believe it was Duke Tobin during the Combine press conference that said something along the lines of there's still a possibility that we keep Andy around. And the Bengals aren't really the type of team that would kind of lie in terms of smokescreen like that. So I believe that what he said he truly meant in terms of a contingency plan in case something like this happened. Like the Bengals are going to value the guys appropriate, or not necessarily appropriately, but they're going to hold strong to their valuations of these players. They're never going to feel like they overpaid for somebody. They're never going to feel like they traded a player away for less than what they valued him. Clearly, they value Andy Dalton a lot more than what the Bears valued him in terms of what they're willing to part away. But that was really the whole problem, was the fact that the Bears only had 2 second-round picks and then a 4th-round compensatory pick, which is essentially a 5th-rounder at that point. Clearly, that was not the 4th-round pick was not enough for the Bengals to let go of Dalton. They wanted one of the second-round picks. The Bears were not willing to do that, and they ended up with Nick Foles anyways. So the Patriots have more flexibility in terms of draft capital to do something with that. But even then, like, there's reports about they're not willing to spend a lot of money for a Tom Brady replacement. And who is anybody to tell Bill Belichick what he's going to do and what he should do? Because clearly he's head and shoulders above everybody else in this industry. So, like you said, it's possible that a Jaguars type situation could be in the cards, even though they seem to be in that complete rebuilding stage, and maybe a bridge quarterback at this point is not necessarily in the cards with that. But again, like, I don't think that like it's imperative that they do this immediately. I think they're still willing to take their time to see what happens, but I do think that in terms of what they like, in terms of having a certain amount of salary cap space to do certain things, they would like this contract off the books. And I think we both agree that he's not going to be on this team for very long, if not right up to the draft.
When have you ever seen Mike Brown bend? I mean, when he takes a hard line, he doesn't bend. I mean, that's who he has always been. That's how his father was. So I don't see that occurring. Let's move, John, to maybe some of the other guys like a Nick Vigil, a Tyler Eifert, those guys still lingering out there. I tend to think that Nick Vigil may be back in this team's plans after aggressively going after some of those high-end linebackers that were in this market. Maybe you bring back a Vigil on a reasonable deal, maybe even a rental deal, a one-year rental deal. You bring him back as a rotational piece in that defense. You still draft a linebacker probably within the first 3 rounds, I would assume. And then that's how you move forward. You've got Pratt, who showed improvement later. You have Vigil. Maybe you add a couple in the draft. That's my thought as it goes with Vigil. I'm a little less optimistic on Eifert coming back to the Bengals personally, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think they're just going to wait and see what happens with Eifert. The tight end market is a little bit odd right now. I think only maybe a handful have signed. Austin Hooper was obviously the headliner. He went to the Browns for, I think, the biggest free agent contract for a tight end in league history. So that market's going to be interesting for him. With Vigil, like it's really hard at this point to say that he's not coming back because they whiffed on the linebackers that they attempted to target to upgrade over him. I don't know if they really believe in these 1-year contracts anymore because like last year we thought that they would do the same thing with Preston Brown. They gave him a 3-year deal that they obviously felt they could get out of after 1 year, which is exactly what they did. They may bring back Vigil on some type of multi-year deal. Again, that's still very flexible for them if they want to get out if they need to, but he's unfortunately looking like one of the better options that they have to at least fill that hole until the draft, because a linebacker is definitely being drafted within the first 3 or 4 picks. Like that's unquestionable at this point, especially with what happened in previously. This is what you didn't want to happen. You didn't want to go into the draft being forced to take a linebacker early in case, there's just no good linebackers left there. Like the odds of a Patrick Queen or Kenneth Murray being there at the 33rd overall pick is very low at this point. You have guys, intriguing options in those middle rounds, but none you're really comfortable being a plug and play starter. Like even with Jermaine, like just look at Jermaine Pratt. You thought that they, maybe put him onto the field a little bit too early, and it took a while to really acclimate into the system. Linebackers are not that important in terms of just building a defense in general, but it's just with the Bengals specific scenario, because they don't have a dominant coverage unit, they don't have a dominant pass rush, they get exposed tremendously easier compared to other teams. And when you have the literal worst linebackers in the NFL, it just looks a lot more worse than it is. And it's unfortunate that they just continue to miss out on opportunities to really improve this unit, even if the value of their importance doesn't match that of a cornerback or an edge rusher. But their options are very limited at this point. There could be a Devondre Campbell or a Josh Bynes who can just be a stopgap at that point, so you don't have to take a linebacker as soon as possible. But unfortunately, Vigil does look like a prime option for them. It's just a matter of when at this point.
Yeah, and there are a number of different statements in our live chats. I'm seeing, Mike Donahue, Sean Williams will play a bunch of linebacker this year. Again, I know that Williams kind of played in linebacker-ish type of roles last year. There were a number of snaps that he took at kind of that position. So maybe the plan is get another safety and you add Williams to a hybrid-ish type of role. I see James Hawley here, Akeem Gaither-Davis. I mean, that's Davis Gaither. That's a guy that, the Bengals had a visit lined up with. They met with him at the combine. They like him dealing with an injury. So, may not be a guy that they rely on immediately, but
at this point, just find athletes. Like
Right.
if nothing else, find guys who can run. I think Devondre Campbell ran like a 4.5 of the combine. You have guys like Davis Gaither, like Willie Gay, who are really fast. Just find guys that can move. Like everything else will work
Right.
out because like they obviously invested in the cornerback spot. They expect that position to be better. They expect the defensive line to be better. If these surrounding units can just hold their own, just find speed at linebacker. If nothing else, just target that one thing. Let everything else work out because they just haven't had that for so long. And even Nick Vigil, who tested like a decent athlete, he just could never get his head on straight. Just find speed. Just go after any speed that's there. There's some speed left on the market. There's definitely speed in the draft. If all else fails, just go after that.
They might, and it might be early. It might be early, and it might be earlier than some think. But the Bengals, as of now, have some glaring holes at linebacker. Nick Vigil seems to be at least a guy that they should be looking at for a rotational or rental type of piece as they look to fill out the rest of that group. Maybe Sean Williams contributes more in a linebacker-ish role. We'll see. There are some other comments before we get out of here, John. There's some other comments among just so many complimentary ones, but there are some comments about the offensive line and, Fred Johnson, also slot corner. I don't know if you have any. Obviously, you talked about Dre, so you kind of think that he's kind of a slot cornerish, or maybe Wayne's, or it kind of depends on the alignment there. But it sounds like, per your source, they are going to keep those top three guys in terms of Jackson, Kirkpatrick, Wayne's, and how they work that out. We'll see. There are some other names that are being brought up, though. Fred Johnson is one I'm seeing a lot tonight as how he could fit on the offensive line, potentially even a Bobby Hart replacement. I see a lot of calling for that tonight, and that's a theme. So, thoughts on that?
Yeah, like going back to the cornerbacks. If you guys don't believe me, I believe Jeff Hobson wrote something like right after BW Webb was released. He was talking about having all three contracts of William Jackson, Drake Patrick, and Trey Waynes on the books, and having to deal with that. Like this seems like a foregone reality at this point. Like I know it doesn't make a lot of logistical sense. Just finding roles for those guys on the field. It could come down to some type of competition type deal. At this point, we don't know a lot. There's still a lot that we don't know, and in terms of where these guys fit logistically. But yeah, to the offensive line, Fred Johnson, right?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. I think he has a great opportunity to do something. Obviously, they value Bobby Hart in the same lenses that they value Alex Redmond. They want him around. They like his mentality. To his point, because the Bengals, passing game got the ball out quickly, his production numbers looked a lot better. I think there were times in the season that he looked somewhat improved. He's obviously not a consistent or viable starter at the position, but I think the presence of Johnson competing with him can maybe kickstart something with that position. I think the athleticism that Johnson has definitely gives him an edge in terms of being a more dominant presence in the running game, doing more of the zone concepts and schemes that they want to do. He's going to get a fair shot at that. I think it'll be interesting to see how they address it in the draft. I think they want a guy who can not only compete at the right guard spot, but has the versatility to maybe down the road compete at right tackle, because Hart only has 2 years left on his contract. They can get out of that deal very easily, either this offseason or the next offseason. I don't think they're going to get out of it this offseason, but there's flexibility in terms of future options at that position. I think they would like a guy that can play multiple positions, that can add presence at those 2 positions specifically. But Johnson's definitely going to be in the mix. A rookie's definitely going to be in the mix at right guard with the potential to slide out to right tackle. But for now, Bobby Hart is here, and there's a reason why he's not cut. They just like him too much.
They do, and he showed improvement, however marginal it may be, towards the end of the season, and it really wouldn't have been that hard to show improvement based on how he played at the beginning of the season. But that's another story for another time. John, let's get out of here. We've gone long. We've talked a lot about what the Bengals have done in free agency, what may be ahead. Any other final thoughts as we drop the mic and get out of here?
It's just, I've been covering this team for 4 years, and you hear things about they're going to be different, they're going to be more aggressive, and you try to compartmentalize that. You try to figure out what that means in terms of looking at past trends, and then they just they have 3 signings, before the league year officially begins, and it's wild and it's crazy, and we're in wild times right now. I thought I would have something more philosophical than this, but like it's all I kind of want to think about at this point because of everything that's going on, and we all need distractions in a time like this. So I guess kudos to the Bengals for giving us some.
Yeah, it gave us some news that we didn't really expect. I mean, I guess we thought that they would be active based on some of these reports and they would bring in some relatively high caliber players, but maybe not to the level of a Trey Waynes or a DJ Reader. We kind of thought they may be, mid-level-ish or so in terms of who they bring in, and that would be generous. It would just kind of do what they did last year and spend money kind of to spend it. But it seems as if Zach Taylor either has Mike Brown's ear or he's in alignment with Duke Tobin, and both have Mike Brown's ear and ownership's ear, and that they're making these moves very significant. I mean, John, some of the biggest free agent acquisitions I can think of, you can go back to Sam Adams, the big defensive tackle from Baltimore, who was way past his prime when he was with the Cincinnati Bengals. You can go to James Harrison, same exact thing, big name that was past his prime and wasn't a scheme fit with this team. Terrell Owens, love what he brought entertainment wise, but same kind of deal, past his prime, as evidenced by the fact that he never really landed with a team beyond, at least not long term, with a team beyond what happened with the Bengals. Talent level wise, you got to figure that this is really a sweet spot for what teams do in free agency in terms of a Waynes and in terms of a Reader. That's how teams are supposed to operate in free agency, and then it subsequently hopefully opens things up in the draft.
Exactly.
Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. That's going to do it for us tonight. Kind of a longer show. For those of you who do not know, we're slated to have Andre Parada, who, by the way, is a Bengals Twitter favorite, Bengals fan Twitter favorite. He's kind of a capologist, a financial guy, and we wanted to talk some numbers about some things. He couldn't join us tonight given the madness. He's got a lot going on, so we will have him back, but unfortunately it just didn't work tonight to have him on, but we will have him on in the future. We have some tentative interviews with some former Bengals players coming up over the next couple of episodes, some pretty big names, and we think you'll be excited about that. So we'll be getting those on the books and getting them on the program. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Thanks for bearing with us. Thanks for being excited as we are with some of what the Bengals have done over the past couple of days in free agency. We'll keep getting at you more. We'll do some listener questions. We'll do all kinds of things because we've got a lot of time now. So we're going to get you more content. See you next time.